At 8:35 a.m. on the morning of November 20th, 1943, First Lieutenant William Deane Hawkins stood on the ramp of Landing Vehicle Tract number 47, gripping 4 Mark II fragmentation grenades in his left hand and a canvas demolition bag containing 6 kilograms of TNT in his right. His Springfield M1903A4 rifle remained slung across his back, untouched. Hawkins was a scout sniper trained for silent observation and long-range precision shooting. He was supposed to be watching the battle through a telescopic sight from 400 yards away, not leading the first wave into the most heavily fortified island in the Pacific. The other officers in the 2nd Marine Division had told him he was wasting his scout sniper platoon by putting them in assault positions. The battalion commander had suggested Hawkins stay back with the command element and provide overwatch. Hawkins had refused. Now, 490 meters of coral reef and machine gun fire stood between his LVT and Red Beach 3, and the only weapon he planned to use was something any farm boy from Kansas could throw. William Hawkins was 29 years old when he landed at Tarawa. He had grown up in Arkansas, learned to shoot hunting deer and wild hogs with his father's Winchester. By 1940, he was competing in state rifle championships, placing 3rd in the Arkansas state match at 600 yards with iron sights. When he enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1941, his marksmanship scores put him in the top 2% of recruits. The Marine Corps created scout sniper platoons in early 1943, small units of expert marksmen trained to operate ahead of the main force, gathering intelligence and eliminating key targets. The doctrine was clear. Scout snipers observed, reported, and engaged from concealment. They did not lead assault waves. They did not storm fortified positions. They did not carry 40 fragmentation grenades and 6 kilograms of TNT into direct combat. Hawkins had read the doctrine. He understood it. He also understood that Batio Island was 291 acres of concrete bunkers, coconut log emplacements, and 4,500 Japanese naval infantry who had spent 18 months preparing for exactly this moment. Intelligence estimated the island had 500 fortified positions, 40 artillery pieces, and 14 coastal defense guns. The Japanese commander, Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki, had declared that 1 million men could not take Tarawa in 100 years. The 2nd Marine Division had 3 days to prove him wrong. Hawkins had attended the briefing on November 18th aboard the USS Zealand. The intelligence officer displayed aerial photographs showing the pier that extended 500 meters from shore, the only structure tall enough to allow landing craft to bypass the coral reef that surrounded the island. The Marines would land at 8:30 during low tide. The reef would be exposed. Most landing craft would ground out 400 to 600 meters from shore, forcing Marines to wade through chest-deep water under direct fire. The pier offered an alternative. A single LVT could drive directly onto the structure, deploy troops, and push inland without exposing men to the killing zone at the water's edge. Hawkins volunteered his scout sniper platoon for the pier assault. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Amy, questioned the decision. Scout snipers were a limited resource, specially trained men who could not be easily replaced. Hawkins argued that the pier was the key to the entire landing. If the Marines could secure it and push inland quickly, they could flank the beach defenses and open a route for follow-on forces. If the pier fell to Japanese counterattack, the entire assault would bottleneck at the reef. Amy approved the mission with one condition. Hawkins would have 20 minutes to secure the pier. If he failed, the next wave would bypass the structure and assault the beach directly. Hawkins accepted the timeline. He spent the evening of November 19th preparing his platoon. 34 Marines, each carrying a Springfield M1903A4 rifle, 40 Mark II fragmentation grenades, a canvas demolition bag with 6 kilograms of TNT, Bangalore torpedoes, cap and fuse detonators, 1 poncho, 1 entrenching tool, and 3 days of K rations. The telescopic sights on the Springfield rifles were problematic. Salt water from the ocean spray had corroded the mounting screws during the voyage from New Zealand. Hawkins ordered his men to seal the scopes in waxed canvas bags and carry them in their packs. For the assault, they would use iron sights, or nothing at all. At 6 a.m. on November 20th, naval gunfire began hitting Baishio. Battleships, cruisers and destroyers fired 3,000 tons of shells in 2 hours. The bombardment was supposed to neutralize the beach defenses. It did not. Most shells struck the coral reef or exploded in the coconut trees without penetrating the reinforced concrete bunkers. When the bombardment lifted at 8:25, the island looked devastated. Smoke and dust obscured visibility. Trees burned. But the Japanese fortifications remained intact, and 4,500 defenders waited in positions that had survived intact. Hawkins boarded LVT-47 at 08:28. The tracked amphibious vehicle held 18 Marines in addition to the crew. Hawkins positioned himself at the front ramp, standing, both hands full of grenades and explosives. No rifle. The LVT lurched forward, engine roaring, and began its approach toward the pier. At 8:35, LVT-47 reached the pier. The structure was 45 meters of wooden pilings and coral fill, elevated 2.5 meters above the reef. Hawkins stepped off the ramp onto the pier surface. He was the first Marine to set foot on Baishio Island. Japanese machine gun fire opened up immediately. Type 92 heavy machine guns, 7.7mm rounds, firing from bunkers 200 meters inland. Hawkins ran. The pier offered no cover, no concealment, just open space and the sound of bullets cracking past his head. At 50 meters, he saw the first fortification, a concrete bunker built into the base of the pier, camouflaged with coconut logs and coral debris. A firing slit, 24 centimeters wide, faced the beach. Hawkins could see the barrel of a Type 92 machine gun inside, muzzle flash visible in the darkness of the aperture. He pulled the pin on a Mark II grenade, counted 2 seconds, and threw. The grenade sailed through the firing slit and detonated inside the bunker. The machine gun stopped. Hawkins moved forward. The pier stretched 490 meters to Red Beach 3. Every 100 meters, the Japanese had constructed another defensive position. Pillboxes, machine gun nests, rifle pits dug into the coral. Hawkins counted 4 visible fortifications between his position and the beach. Behind him, his scout sniper platoon was deploying from LVT-47, spreading out along the pier, moving in pairs. Rifle fire cracked from the coconut trees. Japanese snipers in elevated positions shooting down at the Marines on the pier. At 08:43, Hawkins reached the second fortification. This one was larger, a reinforced bunker with 3 firing slits covering overlapping fields of fire. Type 92 machine guns in 2 of the apertures, an Arisaka Type 99 rifle in the third. Hawkins approached from the left flank, staying low, using the slight elevation of the pier structure for cover. He pulled 2 grenades, armed both, threw the first into the left firing slit, waited 2 seconds, threw the second into the center slit. Both detonations came simultaneously. Smoke poured from the bunker. Hawkins heard screaming inside. He pulled a third grenade, approached the bunker entrance on the inland side, and threw it through the doorway. The screaming stopped. 3 fortifications neutralized. Hawkins checked his ammunition. He had 35 grenades remaining and 6 kilograms of TNT still in his demolition bag. The pier was halfway secure. 245 meters to the beach. At 9 o'clock, Hawkins felt the impact. A Type 97 hand grenade, thrown from a rifle pit 15 meters to his right, detonated against the coral surface near his feet. A 10-millimeter fragment struck his left shoulder, penetrating through his utility jacket and lodging in the muscle tissue. The pain was immediate, sharp, radiating down his arm. Hawkins dropped to one knee, pressed his right hand against the wound, felt warm blood soaking through the fabric. He stayed down for 17 seconds, controlling his breathing, assessing the damage. The fragment had not hit bone. His arm still functioned. He could grip, throw, and pull pins. He stood up and continued moving. The rifle pit that had thrown the grenade was now visible, a shallow depression in the coral 12 meters ahead. Hawkins pulled a Mark II, armed it, threw it into the pit. The explosion silenced the position. By 09:15, Hawkins had reached the end of the pier. Red Beach 3 stretched 200 meters to his left and right, a narrow strip of coral sand backed by a seawall 1.2 meters high. The seawall was supposed to provide cover for the assault waves. Instead, it had become a death trap. Marines were pinned against the wall, unable to advance, taking fire from bunkers positioned 20 to 40 meters inland. Bodies floated in the water near the reef. Landing craft burned. The assault was failing. Hawkins counted 4 bunkers dominating the beach. Reinforced concrete structures, each with multiple firing slits, positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that covered every approach from the water to the sea wall. The bunkers were the problem. As long as they remained operational, the Marines could not move inland. Hawkins studied the terrain. The bunkers faced the beach, their firing slits oriented toward the water. Their rear entrances faced inland toward the airfield. If Hawkins could approach from behind, he could neutralize them the same way he had neutralized the positions on the pier, but reaching the rear of the bunkers required crossing 40 meters of open ground under direct observation from Japanese positions in the coconut trees and the airfield perimeter. Hawkins made his decision. He would use his scout sniper training not for shooting, but for reconnaissance. He would identify the blind spots, the dead ground where a man could move without being seen, and he would exploit those gaps to reach the bunkers. At 9:23, he began his approach. The first bunker was 35 meters northeast of the pier, positioned to cover the beach and the seawall junction. Hawkins moved parallel to the seawall, staying in a shallow drainage ditch that ran from the beach toward the airfield. The ditch was 60 centimeters deep, filled with coral debris and spent shell casings. It provided concealment, but not cover. If the Japanese saw him, they could fire directly into the ditch. Hawkins crawled, elbows and knees, pulling himself forward through the debris, his wounded shoulder screaming with each movement. At 9:38, he reached the rear of the first bunker. The entrance was a reinforced doorway, 1 meter wide, facing away from the beach. Hawkins could hear voices inside, Japanese soldiers shouting coordinates and firing commands. He pulled his demolition bag forward, extracted a Bangalore torpedo, a 1.5 kilogram tube of TNT with a cap and fuse detonator. He armed the detonator, set the fuse for 10 seconds, and placed the torpedo against the doorway. Then he ran. 15 meters back toward the ditch, diving flat as the explosion tore through the bunker entrance. The blast wave rolled over him, hot air and coral fragments. Hawkins stayed down for 30 seconds, then rose and moved toward the second bunker. This one was 25 meters east, larger than the first, with a Type 3/38 coastal defense gun visible through the main firing slit. A 75mm naval gun capable of destroying landing craft at 2,000 meters. The bunker had a crew of at least 8 men, gunners, loaders, and infantry support. Hawkins approached from the south, using a cluster of burned coconut trees for concealment. He reached the rear entrance at 9:51. This time, he used grenades. 4 Mk2 fragmentation grenades thrown in rapid succession through the doorway. The explosions were sequential, overlapping, creating a sustained blast that filled the bunker with shrapnel. When the smoke cleared, Hawkins heard no voices, no movement. He moved to the third bunker. At 10:14, rifle fire struck the coral 30 centimeters from Hawkins' head. A Japanese sniper positioned in a coconut tree 80 meters inland had spotted him. Hawkins rolled left, pressed himself against the seawall and scanned the tree line. He could not see the sniper. The foliage was too dense, the shadows too deep. This was exactly the kind of situation his scout sniper training was designed for. Patient observation, controlled breathing, identifying movement through magnified optics. But Hawkins's Springfield rifle was still slung across his back, and his telescopic sight was sealed in a canvas bag in his pack. He had no time to set up a shooting position. The sniper fired again. The round struck the seawall, spraying coral dust into Hawkins' face. Hawkins pulled a grenade, armed it, and threw it toward the tree. The grenade fell short, detonating in the undergrowth 15 meters from the trunk. The sniper did not fire again. Either the explosion had forced him to relocate, or he was waiting for Hawkins to move. Hawkins moved. He sprinted 20 meters north, dropped into another drainage ditch, and crawled toward the third bunker. No rifle fire followed him. The sniper had relocated or disengaged. The third bunker was positioned at the junction of Red Beach 3 and the airfield perimeter. It covered the northern approach to the beach and provided flanking fire across the seawall. Hawkins reached the rear entrance at 10:29. He could hear a Type 92 machine gun firing from inside, long, controlled bursts directed at Marines attempting to move inland from the seawall. Hawkins pulled 2 grenades, armed both, and threw them through the entrance in quick succession. The machine gun stopped. He followed with a third grenade. The bunker fell silent. 3 bunkers neutralized, 1 remaining. At 10:45, Hawkins began his approach toward the fourth bunker. This one was the largest, positioned 50 meters inland from the beach, elevated on a coral platform that gave it commanding views of the entire landing zone. Intelligence reports had identified this bunker as a command post, housing officers, communications equipment, and the coordination center for the beach defenses. Hawkins moved through the coconut grove, staying low, using the tree trunks and fallen logs for cover. The grove was littered with debris from the naval bombardment, shattered trees, unexploded shells, and the bodies of Japanese soldiers killed in the initial barrage. At 11:03, Hawkins reached a position 30 meters from the command bunker. He could see the structure clearly now. Reinforced concrete walls 1 meter thick, multiple firing slits, a main entrance facing south, and a secondary entrance on the east side. The bunker was intact, operational, and heavily defended. Hawkins estimated at least 12 men inside, possibly more. He checked his ammunition. He had 18 grenades remaining and 3 kilograms of TNT. Not enough to destroy the bunker with a direct assault. He needed a different approach. At 11:17, Hawkins made his decision. He would use the naval gunfire that was still hitting the island to mask his approach. Every few minutes, a destroyer offshore would fire a salvo at targets inland. The shells would whistle overhead, detonate, and create a momentary distraction that covered sound and movement. Hawkins waited for the next salvo. At 11:21, the shells came. 3 rounds, landing 100 meters to the west. Hawkins ran. He sprinted toward the bunker, reached the east entrance and threw 4 grenades through the doorway before anyone inside could react. The explosions were contained within the bunker, the blast channeled by the concrete walls into a sustained pressure wave that killed or incapacitated everyone inside. Hawkins stepped back, pulled his last Bangalore torpedo from the demolition bag, armed it, and placed it against the main entrance. He ran 25 meters and dropped flat. The explosion collapsed the entrance, sealing the bunker. 4 bunkers destroyed. Red Beach 3 was open. By noon on November 20th, Marines were moving inland from the seawall. The breakthrough at Red Beach 3 allowed follow-on forces to advance toward the airfield without being pinned down at the water's edge. Hawkins returned to the beach, reported to Lieutenant Colonel Amy, and received new orders. Continue clearing fortifications along the beach perimeter. Hawkins spent the afternoon moving north along the coastline with 6 Marines from his Scout sniper platoon, identifying and destroying isolated pillboxes and rifle pits. By 1600, he had neutralized an additional 7 positions. At 1830, Hawkins pulled a fragment of the Type 97 grenade from his left shoulder using a knife and a pair of pliers borrowed from a Navy corpsman. The wound had not been treated since 9 a.m. It was infected, swollen, and bleeding. The corpsman offered morphine and evacuation to the aid station offshore. Hawkins refused both. He wrapped the wound with a compress, took 2 sulfur tablets, and returned to his platoon. The night of November 20th was quiet. The Japanese did not counterattack. They were consolidating their remaining forces around the airfield, preparing for a final defense. Hawkins slept for 3 hours in the shell crater near the seawall, his Springfield rifle across his chest, his remaining grenades within arm's reach. At 6:15 on November 21st, the Japanese launched a counterattack. 300 men, naval infantry and support troops advancing from the airfield toward Red Beach 3 in a coordinated assault designed to push the Marines back into the water. Hawkins was awake when the attack began. He heard the shouting, the sound of hundreds of boots on coral, and the crack of rifle fire as the first Japanese soldiers reached the Marine positions. Hawkins grabbed his rifle, his grenades, and moved toward the sound. The counterattack hit the beach perimeter at 06:23. Japanese soldiers with bayonets and grenades charging across open ground toward the seawall. Hawkins positioned himself at a gap in the Marine line where a rifle squad had been forced back by the initial assault. He fired his Springfield for the first time in 2 days. 5 rounds, 5 targets, 80 to 120 meters. Iron sights, no magnification. Each shot dropped a Japanese soldier. Hawkins worked the bolt between shots, ejecting spent cartridges, chambering fresh rounds from the stripper clips in his ammunition pouch. The counterattack broke at 6:38. The surviving Japanese soldiers retreated toward the airfield, leaving 47 bodies on the coral between the perimeter and the beach. At 8 o'clock, Hawkins received orders to lead an assault on the final fortified position near the airfield. A reinforced bunker with a Type 3/38 coastal defense gun, the same 75mm weapon he had destroyed the day before. This bunker was intact, operational, and positioned to fire directly down the runway, preventing Marine aircraft from landing, even if the airfield was captured. Hawkins assembled a team of 8 Marines, checked their ammunition, and began the approach at 8:15. The bunker was 200 meters from the beach, surrounded by rifle pits and communication trenches that connected it to other defensive positions. Hawkins led the team through the trenches, clearing each position with grenades before moving forward. At 9:30, they reached the bunker. Hawkins could see the Type 3/38 gun barrel protruding from the main firing slit, aimed southeast toward the beach. He pulled his remaining TNT from the demolition bag, attached a cap and fuse detonator, and prepared to place the charge against the bunker entrance. At 9:34, he heard the incoming round, a whistling sound, high-pitched, descending rapidly. Japanese artillery, Type 38 field gun, 75mm shell, fired from a position near the airfield command center. The shell landed 19 meters from Hawkins' position, detonating against the coral surface. The blast wave threw Hawkins backward. Fragments struck his lower chest, penetrating through his utility jacket and into his lungs. He felt the impacts, multiple punctures, hot and sharp. He tried to breathe and tasted blood. Hawkins stayed conscious. He was on his back, staring up at the sky, unable to move his legs. He could feel blood pooling beneath him, warm and thick. One of the Marines from his team, Sergeant Roy Williams, crawled over and pressed a compress against the wounds. Williams called for a corpsman. Hawkins shook his head. He pointed toward the bunker, 15 meters away. The TNT charge was still in his hand, armed and ready. Williams understood. He took the charge, crawled toward the bunker, and placed it against the entrance. The explosion destroyed the position. At 9:41, a corpsman reached Hawkins. He administered morphine, applied sulfadiazine powder to the wounds, and attempted to set up a plasma transfusion. The plasma bag was punctured, unusable. The corpsman called for an evacuation team to carry Hawkins back to the beach. Hawkins refused to be moved. He could see Marines advancing toward the airfield, moving through the positions he had cleared. He wanted to watch them take the objective. At 14:30, a second Japanese artillery barrage hit the area near the bunker. Multiple shells, landing in a pattern that covered 50 meters of ground. One shell landed 8 meters from Hawkins' position. The blast killed him instantly. Sergeant Williams recovered Hawkins' body at 15:20. He carried it back to the beach, where it was logged and tagged for transport to the cemetery on a neighboring island. Lieutenant James C. Reed, Jr., executive officer of G Company, filed a witness statement describing Hawkins' actions over the 2 days of fighting. Colonel David M. Shoup, commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, recommended Hawkins for the Medal of Honor. The citation was approved in 1944. The medal was presented to Hawkins' mother in December. On November 24, 1943, 3 days after Hawkins died, the airfield on Betio was officially renamed Hawkins Field. The runway was operational by November 28th, allowing Marine aircraft to land and provide close air support for subsequent operations in the Gilbert Islands. The field remained active throughout the war, supporting bomber and fighter squadrons until 1945. Today, Hawkins Field operates as a civilian airstrip, and a memorial to William Hawkins stands near the runway. The Scout sniper platoons in the Marine Corps were never intended for direct assault operations. The doctrine was observation, reporting, and precision engagement from concealment. Hawkins violated that doctrine on November 20, 1943, and in doing so, He opened Red Beach 3 when the entire assault was collapsing. His actions demonstrated that scout snipers could operate effectively in roles beyond their doctrinal assignments, that grenades and demolitions could neutralize fortifications faster than rifle fire, and that leadership from the front, regardless of speciality or training, could change the outcome of a battle. The Marine Corps revised its scout sniper doctrine in 1944, expanding the mission set to include close reconnaissance and direct action against fortified positions. That revision came directly from the after-action reports filed by the officers who watched Hawkins destroy 5 bunkers in 2 days with a canvas bag full of grenades and a willingness to lead from the most dangerous position on the battlefield. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button and help us share these forgotten accounts with more people who need to hear them. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of the men who changed history, one action at a time.